I was elbow-deep in garden soil when the first letter arrived. The bright yellow envelope stood out against the white of my mailbox like a warning sign, which, as it turned out, it absolutely was. My name is Yosef Rodriguez, though most people call me Joe. After 15 years in the army and 3 tours in Afghanistan, I'd finally settled down in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge Estates. I'd purchased my modest home 2 years ago, attracted by the large backyard and the distance from the newer, more strictly regulated developments popping up around the city. The letter inside the yellow envelope was printed on heavy cardstock with an embossed logo at the top, Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association. I frowned. Sycamore Heights was the new development about half a mile away, full of identical beige houses with perfectly manicured lawns. Dear homeowner, the letter began. It has come to our attention that your property is in violation of multiple HOA regulations, specifically, Article 7, Section 4 regarding unapproved landscaping changes, Article 8, Section 2 regarding improperly stored gardening equipment, and Article 12, Section 9 regarding aesthetic uniformity standards. Please remedy these violations within 7 days to avoid fines of $100 per day per violation. The letter was signed, Karen Whitfield, HOA President. I looked around at my yard, bewildered. My vegetable garden took up most of the backyard, with neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, and herbs. Along the fence, I'd planted native wildflowers to attract pollinators. My gardening tools were stored in a small shed I'd built myself. It wasn't fancy, but it was tidy and practical. More importantly, I wasn't part of any HOA. I'd specifically checked before buying this place. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in my recycling bin. Clearly, someone had made a mistake. 3 days later, a second letter arrived, this one in a red envelope. Final warning, your continued non-compliance will result in immediate daily fines beginning May 15. Additionally, the HOA reserves the right to place a lien on your property for unpaid fines. This time, I was annoyed enough to call the number at the bottom of the letter. Sycamore Heights HOA, this is Karen speaking, came a crisp voice. Hi, this is Yosef Rodriguez at 1842 Oak Ridge Lane. I've received 2 notices about HOA violations, but I'm not part of your HOA. There was a pause. Mr. Rodriguez, all homes in the area are part of our association. Your previous owner signed the agreement. That's not possible. I bought this house from Mrs. Henderson, who lived here for 30 years before moving to Florida. This neighborhood predates your development by decades. I have the paperwork right in front of me, Karen said, her voice taking on that particular tone that customer service representatives use when they think you're an idiot. Your address is listed as part of Sycamore Heights expansion zone. Look, there's been a mistake. My house is in Oak Ridge Estates, not Sycamore Heights. The expansion zone includes portions of what was formerly called Oak Ridge Estates, she explained with exaggerated patience. Now, about those violations, I'm not in your HOA, I repeated firmly. Please stop sending me letters. Mr. Rodriguez, this attitude won't help your case. The fines will begin as scheduled. Before I could respond, she hung up. The next day, I decided to visit the Sycamore Heights HOA office in person. It was housed in their community center, a sleek building with too many windows and not enough character. The lobby featured uncomfortable-looking modern furniture and framed photos of perfectly landscaped yards. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight smile, directed me to Karen's office. Karen Whitfield was exactly what I'd expected, mid-50s, blonde hair in an immaculate bob, designer clothes, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, not getting up from behind her glass desk. I was expecting you. I brought my property deed and survey, I said, placing the documents on her desk. As you can see, my property is definitely not part of Sycamore Heights. Karen glanced at the papers dismissively. These are outdated. The city approved our expansion zone last year. That's not possible without notifying homeowners, I argued. She slid a map across her desk. This is the current zoning map. As you can see, your street is now part of our jurisdiction. I examined the map closely. Sure enough, someone had drawn a line that encompassed my street and several others, labeling it Sycamore Heights Expansion Zone. This looks hand-drawn, I pointed out. It's an informal working copy, she said smoothly. The official maps are on file with the city. I took a photo of the map with my phone. I'll check with the city, then. Please do, she said with that same cold smile. In the meantime, you have 3 days to address the violations before fines begin. As I left her office, I passed a wall of framed photos. One caught my eye, Karen standing between 2 men in expensive suits, all of them holding shovels at what appeared to be a groundbreaking ceremony. The caption read, "Breaking ground on Sycamore Heights Phase 3, Karen Whitfield with developers Richard Michaels and Thomas Grant." The names meant nothing to me then, but I took a quick photo anyway. The next morning, I visited City Hall. After waiting in line for what felt like forever, I was directed to the zoning department, where a board clerk named Marcus helped me look up my property. "Nope," he said, peering at his computer screen. 1842 Oak Ridge Lane is definitely in Oak Ridge Estates, not Sycamore Heights. There's no record of any expansion zone approval. Can you print that out for me? I asked. Marcus printed the official zoning information and stamped it with the city seal. If someone's telling you different, they're wrong. What about HOA jurisdiction? HOAs don't have jurisdiction, Marcus explained. They're private organizations that operate through contractual agreements with property owners. If you didn't sign an agreement, they have no authority over you. Armed with this information, I decided to do some research before confronting Karen again. That evening, I searched online for information about Sycamore Heights and its developers. I found several newspaper articles about zoning disputes and allegations of developer overreach, but nothing specifically about an expansion into existing neighborhoods. I was about to give up when I noticed a post on the neighborhood community forum from someone named Margot Harris, who lived on the street behind mine. Has anyone else in original Oak Ridge Estates gotten letters from Sycamore Heights HOA? They're claiming we're now part of their expansion zone and trying to fine me for my front yard vegetable garden. Help. I immediately messaged her, and we agreed to meet the next day. Margot turned out to be a nurse in her early 40s with a warm smile and no patience for nonsense. We met at a local coffee shop, where she showed me letters identical to mine. "I've lived in my house for 12 years, she said. I specifically chose Oak Ridge because there was no HOA. Now this woman shows up taking pictures of my yard and leaving threatening letters." Wait, she was taking pictures? I asked. Oh yeah, caught her red-handed last week. She had a clipboard and everything, walking around my property like she owned it. That's trespassing, I pointed out. Exactly. When I confronted her, she claimed she had every right as the HOA president. I told her to get off my lawn, and she threatened to double my fines for interfering with HOA business. As we compared notes, another customer overheard our conversation and approached our table. "Are you folks talking about Sycamore Heights HOA?" he asked. He introduced himself as David, a real estate attorney who lived in the area. They tried this same tactic in Willow Creek last year. It's a scam. A scam? I repeated. David nodded. They target neighborhoods adjacent to their development and claim annexation, hoping homeowners will just pay the fines rather than fight it. The developers want to expand, but they can't get zoning approval, so they're trying to pressure existing homeowners to sell. That's illegal, Margot said. Absolutely, David agreed. But it's effective against people who don't know their rights or can't afford to fight back. By the time we finished our coffee, we had exchanged contact information with David and agreed to gather as many affected neighbors as possible. Over the next few days, Margot and I went door to door, discovering that about 20 households in our area had received similar letters. Some people had already paid fines, afraid of the threatened liens against their properties. Others had dismissed the letters as obvious mistakes. One elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, told us he'd already paid over $500 in fines because he couldn't remove his non-regulation rose bushes himself and couldn't afford to hire someone. They said they'd put a lien on my house, he explained, his hands trembling slightly. I've lived here for 40 years. I can't lose my home over some roses. The more stories we heard, the angrier I became. These people were being bullied and scammed by an organization that had no authority over them. On day 7, as promised, a new letter arrived with my first official fine notice, totaling $300 for my continued violations. Attached was a copy of an HOA lien form, not yet filed but ready to go, with my name and address filled in. That same day, Karen herself showed up at my house while I was working in my front yard. She stepped out of a shiny white SUV, clipboard in hand, and began taking photos of my garden. "Excuse me," I called out, setting down my rake. "This is private property." "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, not bothering to lower her camera. "I'm documenting your continuing violations. The fines are now in effect." "I'm not in your HOA," I said firmly. "The city confirmed it. You need to leave my property immediately." She lowered her camera, her smile turning cold. "The city doesn't determine HOA boundaries. Our board does." "That's not how it works," I replied. "And you're trespassing." "I've tried to be reasonable," she said, her voice hardening. "But your attitude is making this difficult. The board meeting is tonight, and we'll be discussing legal action against non-compliant homeowners." "Threatening people with fake authority is illegal," I said. "You should leave now." She gave my garden one last disapproving look before returning to her SUV. "Your fines are now $500, she called over her shoulder. "And increasing daily." That evening, our impromptu neighborhood group met at Margot's house. About 15 homeowners showed up, all with similar stories. David, the attorney, brought copies of relevant laws and explained our options. "First," he said, "no one should pay any more fines. These people have no authority over your properties." "But what about the liens?" Mr. Jenkins asked worriedly. "They can't file valid liens without a legitimate contract," David explained. "And if they try to file fraudulent liens, that's a criminal offense." We decided on a three-pronged approach: first, a cease and desist letter from David to the HOA, second, a group complaint to the city about the fraudulent claims of jurisdiction, and third, attendance at the next city council meeting to bring public attention to the issue. "What about tonight's HOA board meeting?" I asked. Karen mentioned they'd be discussing legal action against us. "It might be worth attending," David suggested. "You're allowed to attend open board meetings, even if you're not members. It would be interesting to hear what they say when confronted with the facts." A few hours later, Margot, David, and I found ourselves in the back row of the Sycamore Heights Community Center meeting room. About 20 actual HOA members were scattered throughout the seats, looking bored or annoyed to be there. Karen sat at the center of a long table at the front, flanked by 4 other board members. She was mid-sentence when she noticed us enter. "And furthermore, the expansion project requires full compliance from all properties in the zone," she was saying, before pausing briefly. Her eyes narrowed at us before she continued. "Which brings us to tonight's main agenda item: enforcement actions against non-compliant properties in the expansion zone." She nodded to a man with a presentation remote, who clicked to display a map on the screen behind them. It was similar to the hand-drawn one Karen had shown me, but now professionally rendered to make it look official. "As you can see," Karen continued, "Phase 3 of our community expansion includes these streets from the adjacent neighborhood." She used a laser pointer to highlight my street and several others. The developers have confirmed that bringing these properties into compliance is crucial for maintaining property values throughout Sycamore Heights. A woman in the second row raised her hand. I thought the city rejected the rezoning application for Phase 3. Karen's smile tightened. We're working through some technical details with the city. In the meantime, we're proceeding as planned. That's not accurate, David said loudly from the back. All heads turned toward us. The city hasn't approved any expansion or rezoning. These homeowners are not part of your HOA. Karen's face flushed slightly. I'm sorry, but non-members may observe but not participate in our meetings. Please refrain from interrupting. Actually, David replied, standing up, I'm here representing multiple homeowners who have been receiving fraudulent violation notices from this HOA. Since you're discussing them specifically, they have a right to respond. A murmur went through the room as actual HOA members turned to look at us with curiosity. Who exactly are you? One of the other board members asked. David Wilson, attorney, he replied. And these are homeowners from Oak Ridge Estates who have been harassed by your organization despite having no contractual relationship with you. This is inappropriate, Karen cut in sharply. If these individuals have concerns, they can schedule a proper hearing with the board. We've tried communicating, I said, also standing. You've ignored us and continued to issue fraudulent fines and threats. An older man in the front row turned completely around in his seat. What's he talking about, Karen? Are we fining people who aren't members? Karen's professional demeanor slipped for a moment. These properties are in our expansion zone, Harold. The paperwork is just catching up to reality. That's not true, Margot said, holding up her city documentation. The city confirmed these properties are not part of your development and never have been. The room erupted in confused conversation as HOA members began questioning each other and the board. Karen banged a gavel repeatedly. Order. This meeting will come to order, she demanded. When the noise finally subsided, she continued with forced calm. These individuals are clearly confused about the situation. We'll address their concerns privately after the meeting. Now, moving on to the next agenda item, I don't think so, called a voice from the doorway. We all turned to see a man in a suit entering with a folder under his arm. I think we need to discuss this right now. Councilman Evans, Karen said, her voice suddenly honeyed. This is unexpected. We didn't know you were attending tonight. Clearly, he replied dryly. I received some concerning information today about this HOA attempting to extend its authority beyond its legal boundaries. I glanced at David, who gave a small nod. He'd mentioned contacting some connections at the city. There's been a misunderstanding, Karen said smoothly. We're simply preparing for the approved expansion. That's interesting, Councilman Evans said, considering the Zoning Commission rejected that expansion proposal 3 months ago. He held up a document from his folder. And here's the official record of that decision, which specifically states that Sycamore Heights may not expand into existing neighborhoods. The room went completely silent. Furthermore, Evans continued, I've received copies of threatening letters sent to homeowners outside your jurisdiction, falsely claiming authority and demanding payment. That appears to cross the line from misunderstanding into fraud. Karen's face had gone from flushed to pale. The developers assured us, yes, about those developers, Evans cut in. Michaels and Grant are currently under investigation for similar activities in 2 other counties. He turned to address the room. For any actual Sycamore Heights residents here tonight, I suggest you review your HOA's financial statements very carefully. In similar cases, we've found that homeowner funds were being misused. One of the other board members, a nervous-looking man with thinning hair, suddenly stood up. I need to leave, he announced, heading for the door. Sit down, Peter, Karen hissed. No way, he replied loud enough for everyone to hear. I told you this was illegal. I'm not going to jail for this. That broke the dam. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with HOA members shouting questions at the board and the board members either trying to restore order or, in Peter's case, attempting to flee. Councilman Evans made his way over to us. "Mr. Wilson," he said, shaking David's hand. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We'll need formal statements from all the affected homeowners." "We've started gathering them," David replied. "We have at least 20 so far." "Excellent. And we'll need copies of all communication from the HOA. I have a folder full at home," I told him. Over the next hour, the meeting transformed into an impromptu investigation. City officials were called in, and HOA members voted to immediately suspend the entire board pending a full audit. Karen refused to surrender her HOA records until a police officer who'd been called to manage the increasingly tense situation explained that obstruction charges were possible. By midnight, we had learned that Karen and 2 board members had been working with the developers to pressure homeowners in our neighborhood to sell their properties at below-market rates. The developers wanted to tear down our existing homes and expand their cookie-cutter development. The fake fines and threats were designed to make living in our homes so unpleasant and seemingly expensive that we'd give up and sell. What's more, they'd been skimming from the legitimate HOA funds to finance their scheme, which explained why actual Sycamore Heights residents were suddenly so interested in the investigation. 2 weeks later, I was back in my garden, pulling weeds and checking on my tomato plants, when a city vehicle pulled up in front of my house. Councilman Evans stepped out, along with Marcus from the zoning office. "Mr. Rodriguez," Evans called with a wave. "Got a minute?" I walked over to greet them, wiping my hands on my jeans. "We wanted to update you personally," Evans said. "The investigation is proceeding well. Karen Whitfield and the developers were arrested yesterday on multiple charges including fraud, attempted extortion, and criminal conspiracy." "That's great news," I said, genuinely relieved. "The district attorney believes they've done this in at least 3 other communities," Marcus added. "They've been targeting neighborhoods without HOAs that border their developments." "What about the people who already paid fines?" I asked, thinking of Mr. Jenkins and his roses. "Full restitution will be part of any plea deal," Evans assured me. "We're working to identify everyone affected." And, Marcus added with a grin, the city council passed an emergency ordinance last night that prevents any HOA from expanding into existing neighborhoods without a supermajority vote of the affected homeowners. "They're calling it the Garden Protection Act," Evans said with a wink. "Figured you'd appreciate that." After they left, I called Margot to share the good news. She suggested we organize a neighborhood garden tour to celebrate our victory, and within days, signs appeared throughout Oak Ridge Estates announcing the first annual, Free to Grow, garden showcase. The event turned into a proper block party. Even some of the legitimate Sycamore Heights residents came over, expressing both apologies for their former HOA's behavior and envy at our freedom to plant whatever we wanted. Mr. Jenkins proudly showed off his award-winning roses, now thriving without the stress of potential fines. As for me, I expanded my vegetable garden and added a small greenhouse that definitely wouldn't have met any HOA's aesthetic standards. When the first tomatoes ripened, I made a huge batch of salsa and shared it with my neighbors during our monthly community meeting, a friendly gathering with absolutely no mandatory rules, no fines, and definitely no Karens allowed. The experience had transformed our once quiet neighborhood into a real community, united by our battle against overreach and our shared love of individual expression. And every time I see my mismatched garden beds, non-regulation shed, and the colorful wildflowers along my fence, I smile at the freedom that comes from knowing exactly where my property stands, firmly outside any HOA zone.